Good evening, everybody, and sorry to interrupt your conversation. I know it was a very important and passionate one. My name is Palesa Madumo, your resident reputation management specialist. I am also the CEO of Vuma Reputation Management. So I am very excited this evening. Thank you very much, Sharon, for the opportunity, and everybody, all the guests tonight. I'd like to welcome you to the third annual South African Chamber of Commerce UK Gala Dinner. And for the first time ever, we're trading the House of Lords for the House of Zoom for a virtual wine and food extravaganza. Very exciting. Tonight is also the anniversary of the lockdown starting in the UK. So may I please ask for all of us to take a moment of silence in honor of those we lost during the pandemic. Tonight is about festivities, and we are fortunate enough to be in the company of wine estate owners, winemakers, connoisseurs, who will be teaching us a little bit about wine and taking us through the wines that have been selected for this evening's pairing. I'm also looking forward to our speakers today, Mr. Jacob Marie, as well as Leila Fourie. I hope everybody managed to get their food and wine deliveries on time for today's special event, where we'll be dining together but apart. So tonight's dinner has been put together by Noble House Events and prepared by the resident chef, Chef Owen Sullivan. Let's kick off the festivities. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome onto the virtual podium the Chamber Chairperson, well known by all of us, Sharon Constançon.
Thanks, Palesa. I really appreciate it. First thing I'd like to say is welcome to Leila, our keynote speaker who has just joined us. Welcome, Leila. Thank you very much. I know you're coming in from Cape Town, and thanks for coming in as early as you have done. I am Chairman of the South African Chamber. That's just one of my day jobs. It's the one that I thoroughly enjoy, very passionate about, and I've got to know the most amazing number of people and selection of people in both countries, both the UK and in South Africa, which makes the job an extremely rewarding one for me. What went into today? Just not being beaten by COVID and wanting to make sure that we could do something a little special, put a smile on people's faces in a different way. You know, COVID is running on so much longer than we wanted and we had hoped. And a lot of people I've noticed are feeling down, stressed, strained, irritable, short-tempered, frustrated, you know, all those things that you can sense that people are not in their best. I thought, oh, come on, let's get dressed up for the occasion. And my first comment is just to thank all of you for taking the trouble, please, or taking the trouble for actually getting dressed up and humoring all of us and enjoying the evening together with us, because I think it'll just be something so completely different. What have we been doing this last year other than planning for today? We did some charity work. We got involved with the Solidarity Fund, and a number of us, less than are in the room, I think, walked all the way from Cape Town to Bike Bridge and all the way back to Cape Town and beyond into the ocean. So we walked a huge amount of distance, 2,400 miles, in purpose of charity. We've done webinars galore on topics ranging from the Governor of the Reserve Bank to not quite baking cook sisters, but the complete range from industry to business to CPD to networking, to talking about life, to well-being, to looking after ourselves, talking about the complexities that we're in COVID and how do we cope with them. So we've had a complete range, quite a lot of work around trade, investment, economics of South Africa, regions of South Africa have been featured. So we've done as much as we can to support getting people to know about the opportunities South Africa offers, and from the UK point of view, what export opportunities South Africa can look forward to. So we will be continuing that at the rate that we have been doing and keep up the good work as much as we can. So any ideas, please, you know how to get hold of us. So at this point, I would like to welcome Jacob Marie, who is the one of the 4 investment envoys for the President of South Africa, President Ramaphosa. And I have to say, I wouldn't want Jacko's job right now. It's a difficult one, given the position South Africa's in, but then actually globally, we're all in difficult positions for different reasons. So Jacko, who is also the Deputy Chairman of Standard Bank and the Chairman of Liberty Life, I'd like to hand over to you for a few moments.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for that, Sharon. Yeah, it's wonderful to be with you all. This is the smartest I've been for a long, long time. And yeah, I really enjoy the time that I have with the Chamber. I think being on the Advisory Council of the Chamber is something very worthwhile. The Chamber does great work. Something that I know because of my investment envoy role is just that if you look at the stock of foreign investment into South Africa, in other words, what's already on the ground in South Africa, 78% of it comes from Europe, and roughly half of that comes from the UK. So people talk about China and Japan and the US and all these things, but the reality is that of the fixed investment on the ground in our country, 40-odd% comes from the UK. So UK will always remain very important to South Africa. There are thousands of companies, British companies, that have some sort of involvement in South Africa. We all know what a tough time it's been, and it's very easy to get negative, and there was some pretty negative stuff before we started this evening. I thought, just people do tend to see the negative, and we've got a very toxic kind of political situation. The GDP was down by 7% last year, and we lost 1.5 million odd jobs. So it's very tough. But my colleague at Stanley, Kevin Lings, has put together some interesting thoughts, just about 6 things that actually give you some cause for optimism in the short term. And the first thing that's going for us is that global commodity prices are higher. There was a big rebound, and obviously a lot of that was driven by rising demand from China. And the result of all of that was that our export values of gold, platinum, and iron ore grew in value by 24% last year, despite the actual fall in tons of production. So that had a major positive impact. And we can still look forward to pretty good commodity prices for 2021 as well. So that's something of a tailwind. Now, the result of that is that we had a record trade surplus of 270 billion rand in 2020, compared with a tiny surplus in 2019. And so we've really switched from a sustained deficit for a long time into a surplus. But obviously, this is commodity driven, and what's critical is that the government starts looking at ways to free up policies, which I'll get back to get more manufactured exports and the like. A third big positive is that domestic interest rates are at historic lows, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from the governor about that. They were cut to the lowest level. 3.5% repo rate is the lowest it's ever been since it was introduced. And of course, it's been sensible. But at the same time, the inflation rate has tended to surprise on the downside. And so we don't have inflationary problems. And so it looks like we'll be able to keep interest rates low for a long time, which is good for consumers, some of whom are over indebted, and smaller businesses. But it will also start boosting spending demand. A fourth positive is that tax collection has improved quite dramatically. And the 3 sort of reasons for that: the National Treasury's forecasts 6 months or so ago, time of the medium-term budget statement, were pretty conservative. You've had quite a big rebound in corporate tax, and the job losses that I talked about did really typically come from low-income earners, so that the impact in terms of tax wasn't that significant. The government did ramp up its borrowing during the end of last year and early this year in anticipation of having to raise funding to fund the fiscal deficits. But the weekly bond auctions have consistently been oversubscribed, and government funding is now well ahead of budget. And so that gives the government some room to move, and why they saying they can afford to pay for the vaccines that we can source. And lastly, foreign investment into South Africa, and here I'm talking more about the bond markets, and I'm sure Leila will allude to some of these things later. we saw that during 2020 we had foreigners selling South African bonds. Foreign ownership of South African government bonds fell from a peak of about 42% of all holdings were foreign in early 2018 to just under 29% last October. But the trends have reversed in November and December in particular, and they started buying government bonds for the first time since June. So, that's not my role. We're interested in fixed investment, but without these foreign flows, it'll be very difficult for South Africa to progress. Some other things that have been in the newspapers just of late, you've had Marion Roberts and WBHO, two of the biggest construction companies, saying they've got big order books now. So it looks like some of the infrastructure spending is starting to get through to the construction companies. And then, of course, last week we had the big news around renewable energy after the long wait. And we had Minister Mantashe announcing, winners for 2,000 megawatts of emergency energy, 20-year contracts. They have to be pretty much done by middle of next year, August next year. And that's an injection of something like 45 billion rand into the economy. And there's a further bid window coming through for 2,600 megawatts of wind and solar, which has to sort of be closed, or the bids have to be in by August. So there's a lot of good stuff that's happened there. And I know from my envoy role that this is an area that really is a hot topic. We've also heard quite a lot just of late of Operation Vulindlela, which is an initiative in the presidency, between the presidency and National Treasury, of some highly qualified professionals who really trying to fast track various critical structural reforms, particularly in the network industries of electricity, digital communications, water, and freight transport, because of their high impact on economic growth. So this is an important initiative, and the president's certainly placing a lot of store by that. But as we all know, that what we need is growth, and the only real lever to pull to get growth going is fixed investment in South Africa in whatever shape or form. Now, we as envoys were tasked with trying to attract $100 billion of investment over 5 years, or call it 1.3 trillion rand over 5 years. And I've often been asked, why is what we're doing, hasn't it shown more benefits or borne more fruit? And I think the answer lies in the fact that if you look at what's typically regarded as the level of fixed investment or investment to GDP that gets growth going, it's somewhere between 25% and 30% of GDP has to be in the form of investment, and we haven't been close to that for a long time. In 2020, it's likely to have been at about 16%. And if one thinks of what that translates to in rands or dollars, to get investment to GDP to 25% means that we have to have investment of about 1.25 trillion rand, or it's pretty close to $100 billion per year, as opposed to $100 billion over 5 years to really get this economy going. And we all know that in order to do that, it's all about policies and about making the country more user-friendly. And the president and his team really do understand this, but they have lots of constraints. But it's been very encouraging just of late to see that some of the stuff is starting to come through at last. And we've got another meeting with the president tomorrow evening, and we look forward to engaging with him, because he knows that for him to have a real chance at a second term and to leave a legacy, he needs to get the economy going. So I'll stop there, Sharon. I hope that just gives you a little bit of a slightly more positive feel about South Africa at the moment.
And it's so nice to hear it coming from people who believe in the country, who are involved at the grassroots and where things are really happening. So thanks very much, Jacko. I'm not going to do Palesa's job. I'll leave Palesa to take over from here.
Thank you very much, Sharon. And Jaco, thank you very much for those positives. I think at this time in our lives, we need them. We're actually in dire need of positive thinking and a positive attitude in terms of growth in South Africa. So thank you very much for reminding us of that and reminding us to stay true to what it is that's actually going to help us grow this country. Andrew Skipper also added another reason to be cheerful, which is the Lions Tour to SA. So thank you very much, Andrew, for that. I have my wine ready for the evening. They say wine improves with age. I'd like to say I'm probably going to improve with wine. So I'm very happy to introduce our next speaker, Gerard Perold, who is what they call an esteemed pinotage man. Let's find out what that means. In fact, his great-grandfather was the creator of the pinotage grape variety in South Africa and imported it from France. The Perold wine cellar is South African's wine specialists in the UK, and Gerard is going to tantalize our taste buds and tell us all about their Labori sparkling wine and how to pair it.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much, Lorena. Yes, for me, as South Africa, of course, I'm from South Africa, and it's a beautiful country we have, and doesn't matter where you live in the world. For me, it's always something like this in an evening where we can get together in some way or form. It's always nice to celebrate and celebrate something good. And for me, we in our wine world in South Africa, we make such a beautiful wines, and I'm sure you all waiting to taste a little bit more of Seven Springs wines in a minute. And there's actually a funny story before I get to Labori. It's actually the first time I sort of started off with my business. Actually, the shop we own now in the village is when I started off my business is when I met Tim and Vaughan. I sort of meet up with them in the shop, and we tasted Seven Springs. And because of that tasting, I decided to actually take on my great-grandfather's footsteps and take his work further, and bringing some South African wines from South Africa into the UK and celebrate that over here. And one of those is Labori Sparkling. And this one is a lovely MCC, so it's your Blanc de Blanc Chardonnay. And this 2014 vintage. And 2014 vintage was a little bit difficult, but with some fantastic viniculturists in our country, and one of them, Marco, really worked very hard in the vineyard, dealing with these type of issues to make sure that we're getting the right grapes to produce fantastic products. And the wine was lovingly made by the winemaker, and then 36 months it matured in bottle before the discorching and cork was put on. Lovely little wine, and for me, really nice on the nose. And if you have some, you can smell it. If you don't, well, you know where you can get some. A lovely sort of nice orange blossoms on the nose, and a nice bit of citrus coming through. And the same on the palate, on the mousse that comes through on the palate is nice and elegant, and a nice bit of lime and toasty breadiness coming through. And if you've started in a minute with that, and then go over into the unoaked Chardonnay, I think they will follow on very nicely together. And I think pairing the Labori for me is something with seafood, something nice and rich, where the natural acidity in the sparkling wine can cut through nicely, and combine the two together. So for our sparkling wine in South Africa, have a glass and let's have a good night. Thank you. Over back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Gerard. That was very interesting. It's always lovely to learn a few new things. about wine. So thank you very much for that. Next up is Tim Pearson, who is the owner of Seven Springs Wine Estate. This wine estate is nestled between the seaside town of Hermanus, and for those of us who've been lucky enough to be in Hermanus, you'll know just how beautiful it is, as well as the spa town of Caledon in the picturesque Western Cape. Tim is going to tell us about his journey with wine.
Thank you very much. And calling it wine estate, it sounds like something very, very grand. We only have 8.5 hectares of planted vines, which means, I suppose, estate, you can call it an estate if you like. And Gerard, just to say, I've never had a moose on the nose before. Is that something you get from Canada? But a moose,
A moose on the palate, yeah.
okay. Yeah, so I've never had a moose on my nose before.
I know I know the Afrikaans accent might be really hard to catch, but yeah.
Thank you very much. And Gerard was correct. About 4 years ago, we met in this little town in Somerset where him and Nikki live. And we've had a business relationship since, which has been excellent. But Seven Springs, so let's go back to 94, 95. Vaughan and I lived in a place in South Africa called Nelspruit. I don't know, most of you people have heard of it. It's now called Mbombela. And although I guess Nelspruit is a million miles from Cape Town in the wine producing area, our passion for wine our passion for South Africa was garnered through going to the Kruger National Park and places like that. So 2005 was our 25th wedding anniversary. We spent 3 weeks in Cape Town, and Vaughan can take this over now, but I've always been interested in wine. We have this passion for South Africa. We spent a very wonderful 3 weeks in the Western Cape, and this was in October 2005, and you can take it from here.
I think basically Seven Springs is the culmination of Tim's passion for wine, for our love of South Africa. But actually it was also, a lot of people ask us, why didn't you do it in France or Italy or somewhere a bit closer? And actually part of it also came from the South African winemakers themselves, in that they are, in our experience, really generous and warm-hearted people. None of them seemed to laugh at our plans when we said what we were going to do, and very many of them were very generous with their advice and support, and that's been the same ever since. And so I think that was the main reason. Also, you in South Africa, you drive on the correct side of the road. The time difference isn't great, and we can come down and enjoy, most years, not this one obviously, but come down and enjoy the summer and the harvest down there when it's really miserable weather here. In fact, this February has been our first February in the UK for about 10 years, and I'm hoping it's the last for the next sort of 10 years as well. The hardest part by far, I think, has been the sales and marketing. Exporting and selling wines is hugely difficult. I think probably being based in the UK, we were able to understand the international market as well as anybody, simply because it is such a crowded market here, but also we have such an opportunity to benchmark our wines on an international level. And so we were really clear of what we needed to achieve.
Thank you very much for that very interesting story. I think a lot of people could also relate. Dawn was born in Nelspruit, and someone else had a banana farm grew up on a banana farm in Nelspruit. So thank you very much for sharing those wonderful, warm stories. I'm just very cognizant of the time, and I'm going to ask Gus to essentially lead us into the first course tonight. So we just want to know a little bit about how we're going to pair our smoked salmon, as well as a vegetarian option, which is the poached leek terrine. So Gus, please take it away. Gus is a winemaker, at Seven Springs. And if you ever wanted to know a winemaker, tonight's your opportunity.
Good evening, and thank you very much for that lovely introduction. So yeah, my name is Gus, and I joined the Seven Springs team for the first vintage of 2019. We're currently in the process of fulfilling our 2021 vintage. And the first wine that you're going to be tasting this evening, if I'm not mistaken, is the Annual Chardonnay. Now, this is one of the main reasons I joined the company, because as Tim and Vaughan mentioned earlier, they have very site-specific plantings. And in the part of the valley where we are, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir are definitely the best suited to that area. This particular wine comes from slopes that are south-facing and are at approximately about 218 meters above sea level. So we have a nice elevation compared to other areas of the Hemel and Ardagh. We're nearer the Shores Pass section of the Hemel and Ardagh Valley. So we don't actually fall into the category of Hemel and Ardagh Valley, Upper or Ridge. We fall under the wine of origin of the Overberg. That's very important to mention because of the classification system. But in actual fact, we're all in the same valley, between the same mountains, with the sea just over the top of them. So the fact that we have a slightly higher elevation works in our favor because we have quite dramatic temperature differences. And the reason I'm talking to you about the weather is not because I'm English, but it's actually because it has a profound effect on the health and longevity of the vines. The vines really appreciate where we are, the differences in daytime and nighttime temperatures, which can often be 15 or 10 degrees Celsius different. So this particular Chardonnay is fermented in stainless steel tanks, and it's really a true expression of the vineyard. Because these are south-facing, they don't get the full brunt of the sun during the hottest parts of the day, and as a result, the vines don't stress, and they produce very slowly ripening berries, which results basically in a really nice balance of acidity and fruit flavors. So I think hopefully you'll find when you're pairing this wine that you'll find that it has a nice nose. For a start, it's very appealing. Secondly, when you actually have a sip, it's got nice mouthfeel. There's a broadness to it. It's not viscous and oily, but it's broad. There's a lot of fruit there in the middle. And then on the finish, you've got this beautiful acidity, and that comes from those shale soils south-facing with the maritime climate, cool influences. And that freshness of the acidity really gives backbone and longevity to the wine. So if you're having it with salmon, for example, which is quite a full-bodied fish, it has enough texturally to match the richness of the salmon. It also has enough flavor in order to complement whatever you're having the salmon with. In my case, a bit of ginger and some asparagus. I'm afraid I had to cook for myself this evening. I'm not so lucky to have my meal sent to me. Obviously, we're too far away. But it really cuts through and marries beautifully with those flavors. And then once you've swallowed everything and the wine is gone and the food is gone, you've got this really, really clean, fresh sensation in your palate. And that's what we need for steel fermented Chardonnay to do with things like this, and the vegetarian option as well, is to cut through the flavors of whatever food is being presented to balance the body of those foods, whether it's vegetable or fish, and to really have this clean, moorish sensation in your mouth. As soon as you've swallowed everything, you're ready for the next mouthful. And that's really what we're trying to achieve with the Annual Chardonnay, something that's fresh, light, can hold its own, can stand up to flavors of different dishes, but more essentially acts as a palate cleanser. And also it's very moorish. It leaves you, I get salivation when I have a sip of this because of the acidity, and that actually makes me want to have the next spoonful and the next glass of wine to go with it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Gus. That actually sounds extremely exciting and just in time for us to go into our first breakaway for the evening. So everybody, please enjoy yourselves and don't forget to make the most of your networking session this evening. I hope your steaks are also keeping warm in the oven because they will be needed to be whipped out. But before that, I have the pleasure of introducing a woman whom I've had the pleasure of working with and I know is a very proud South African. Dr. Leila Fourie is the Group Chief Executive Officer of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. She has 20 years work experience in consulting, investment banking, retail banking, and capital markets. At the JSE, Dr. Fourie is responsible for the development and execution of the JSE's corporate strategy and ensuring that the JSE remains competitive as a stock market, as well as a platform for growth and access to capital, which I also know is something Leila is very passionate about. She's also the co-chair of the United Nations Global Investors for Sustainable Development and is on the board of the exchanges related to the JSE. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome our keynote speaker for tonight, Dr. Leila Fourie.
Thank you so much, Palesa and Sharon, and good evening to everybody. It really is a great and deep honor and pleasure for me to join you this evening at your virtual dinner, which is hosted by the South African Chamber of Commerce. And I'd really like to thank the Chamber of Commerce for so generously hosting the virtual dinner and for inviting me to join you this evening from Cape Town in South Africa. As I sat down to prepare for this evening's address, I was contemplating the future of South Africa, and I was reminded of something that I observed recently in a meander around the Stellenbosch Mountains amidst the most recent bushfires that you may have read about around 10 days ago. And it reminded me that in a region of such rich biodiversity, which is considered the hub of the Cape Floristic region, the king protea stands out very tall and defiant. And the protea is an enduring symbol of the resilience of South Africa, its people, and the role that it plays in the broader economy. After the bushfire spread, the resilient protea will be reborn, and its nectar will invite insects and birds back into the ecosystem. Its pollen will serve as a source of sustenance for the surrounding wildlife. And in return, that very same wildlife will help to propagate its pollen. So even in nature, there are buyers and sellers. Tonight, we are celebrating a long-standing friendship between Great Britain and South Africa. And this is a friendship that finds its roots in the gold rush of the 1860s, and that has seen extensive collaboration and partnership over the years in the fields of trade and investment. International trade and collaboration are the cornerstone of economic growth and prosperity. And reinvigoration of cross-border partnership will be fundamental to the recovery of the South African economy. South Africa is Great Britain's largest trade partner in Africa, with more than $8 billion in South African imports arriving each year. International trade and investments support the healthy flow of capital in the economy and help to drive economic prosperity and employment. But restrictions on movement as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic have impacted this. from an investment perspective, UK investors have for many years been active participants in the South African capital markets. But during the last year, the increased uncertainty caused by the pandemic saw global investors reduce their exposure to emerging markets, opting instead for advanced market safe haven investments. This played out in our equity and debt markets during the first half of 2020. And as Jacko had alluded to, and it was compounded by the downgrade to junk status by Moody's and the historic crash of oil prices. As we entered 2021, we have seen a slight turnaround in sentiment and a slowdown in selling, with 2 of the first 3 months of the year recording net positive purchases by foreign investors. With global rates either negative or close to zero, investors in the developed world are in search of yield, and South African corporates offer that. So tonight, we celebrate the collaboration between South Africa and the United Kingdom. And I'm reminded of many of the JSE's largest corporates, which have expanded their operations and investments in the United Kingdom. Some of them are represented at this evening's gala dinner. The first African company that listed its shares in London in 1930s was African Explosives and Industries, now known as AECI. AECI made blasting explosives and detonators for gold and diamond mining industries in South Africa at the time. Since then, a number of global companies have taken up dual-listed structures in South African markets, giving investors geographic diversification and the benefit of exposure to both emerging and developed market forces. Approximately 1/3 of the JSE's dual-listed main board companies have a listing in the UK as well. As Africa's largest stock market, we are conscious of the role the exchange plays in facilitating inbound investment and in providing investors with a diverse range of listings. As we begin to contemplate our way out of the pandemic, this role will become more important than ever. After the pandemic-induced market crash in 2020, which saw markets plummet, just over a year ago, a number of global benchmarks have soared, interestingly, to record highs in the months thereafter. And it was at this point that we saw a distinct divergence between Wall Street and Main Street. As unemployment soared and earnings plummeted, the markets with high exposure to technology counters bounced back. And the NASDAQ composite recovered all its losses in record time and added more than 30% from its February peak to end the year up 43.7%. Meanwhile, the S&P 500 gained 18.4% in 2020, and this was led largely by giant tech companies like Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, and Facebook. Conversely, in the UK, the FTSE 100 recorded its worst year since the global financial crisis, ending the year down more than 14%. Of course, compounded by Brexit woes and lower exposure to technology stocks. In South Africa, the JSE's headline all-share index recovered from a year-to-date low of minus 34% in March and ended the year 4% up for the full year. These numbers tell a very different story to the real economic indicators. Economic activity for the entire year decreased by 7% in 2020 compared to 2019. And this is the biggest annual fall in economic activity that the country has seen since 1946. By comparison, the economy shrank by 1.5% in 2009 during the global financial crisis. Of course, it's not all bad, as Jacko alluded to, and we do have that trade surplus he mentioned, the commodity boom, PGM boom, and also the government has committed to fiscal discipline and containing their wage bill. Despite the impact of the pandemic on economic growth, there was some silver lining during 2020. Particularly the South African agriculture sector escaped the pandemic relatively unscathed, expanding production by 13.1% in 2020. COVID-19 has extracted a terrible toll on the world. More than 1.5 million South Africans have tested positive for coronavirus, and more than 50,000 lives have been lost to the pandemic. And we have a similar population to the UK, just slightly smaller. Unfortunately, many more millions of lives will suffer the long-term economic side effects of the virus for years to come. Business confidence dropped in the first quarter of 2021, reflecting that 65% of businesses are dissatisfied with prevailing business conditions. It's estimated that approximately 2.3 million jobs were lost from December 2019 to the trough in quarter 2 of 2020. And while the gradual opening of the economy has seen a portion of these jobs rejoin the economy, the statistics don't fully capture the impact of pay and of reduced pay and lower hours. There are many routes to improving sentiment and confidence, and economic growth and trade will be a cornerstone of any recovery that might happen moving forward. Leaders, both in government and business, have a responsibility to chart an equitable and sustainable route to economic prosperity. Consider 3 catalysts. The first relates to policy certainty. Investors, both local and international, require a degree of clarity and consistency in policy to execute long-term investment decisions. Foreign direct investment into South Africa decreased by 46% last year, according to the UN 2020 World Investment Report. Policy certainty, particularly around electricity and telecommunications, could unlock and attract vital capital flows. The second catalyst relates to the digitization of our economy, and the importance of which cannot be overstated. Digital transformation creates efficiencies, drives innovation, and it democratizes access to information. The rapid adoption of technology in a number of African economies has resulted in a digital revolution, changing the way people live, work, and learn. The pandemic has also proven that digital technology allows businesses to adapt and to respond quickly to shocks, and speeding up the process and making the workforce more agile. Third and finally, the most crucial catalyst is solving for infrastructure demands. Spending money now on broadband, public transport, schools, housing, not to mention investment to rundown bridges and roads, would position South Africa to lead the continent in the next 100 years. With these 3 catalysts, policy certainty, digital transformation, and infrastructure investment, South Africa has the potential to emerge from the crisis renewed. Very much like the protea, whose dormant buds survive the harshest wildfires, only to emerge when the fire is extinguished. The protea is resilient, and it's found all around us. In our innovations and entrepreneurs who work to solve South Africa's unique challenges, in our small and medium businesses who employ millions of South Africans in tourism, manufacturing, agriculture, financial and technology sectors, in our capital markets, which are strong, deep, and liquid, in our constitution, which is one of the most progressive in the world, and in our leaders who advocate for change. We'll need that same resilience now as we consolidate the lessons that we have learned going forward. Each of us holds a piece of the puzzle to achieving a more prosperous future. It's time to bring those pieces together.
Leila, that was amazingly positive, uplifting, informative. I think everyone else would love to ask you 10,000 questions, but our allotment today doesn't. But what I will do is introduce you back as to one of our webinars, and we'll have 150 people there to ask you all the questions that need to be asked. I'm going to ask you just two, hopefully, that we can get in the few minutes that we have together. First, a business one. My day job is involved in the South African Rand and currency management. Any views from yourself as to why the Rand is as relatively, and I use that word relatively, stable and strong at the moment?
Well, I think analyzing the Rand is more of a dark black art than a science. I would say that some of the factors that are influencing the strength of the Rand relate more to the movement in the dollar than the actual Rand. Yes. And so the stimulus plan, which is causing a reversion away from that safe haven that I mentioned and in search of yield, particularly in emerging markets, is one of those points. Of course, the much more positive budget speech that the finance minister, or as the UK would call it, treasurer, announced in February, signaled a more decisive, more disciplined approach to fiscal management. It signaled an investment in infrastructure. It signaled a progressive approach to the wage bill containment. All of these bode well. And I also think that notwithstanding the egregious and enormous second wave that South Africa endured, the economic activity has not shut down completely. South Africa has 60 million citizens, not 1,000 miles away from the UK population. Right. And somehow we have managed through this crisis quite effectively, notwithstanding the high number of infections that we had. So I'd say those are probably the key contributors. The Rand is one of the most volatile currencies in the world, and I have no doubt that I may be proven wrong in the not too distant future.
Well, it has its times, and I've known it for decades now, so it is a fun currency to work with. It does offer lots of surprises. Two things there. You talk about the resilience of the South African people. I'd like to translate that to the resilience of an individual, yourself. You do something very, very, very dangerous in your non-business life. And I've heard you talk about the strength and resilience you gained from rock climbing as one of your sports. So as my last question to you, let's learn a little bit about the human Leila Fourie and your rock climbing activities.
Well, truth be told, I get down to Cape Town as often as I can, not only because the Byside and our capital formation resides here and I need to come down to see them, but also because I'm able to rock climb, and that is indeed one of the things that I'm planning to do next weekend. I've spent a number of years doing high altitude mountaineering in, for example, Mount Elbrus in Russia, Antarctica, the Himalayas, and South America, various other countries. And I switched to rock climbing 4 years ago. And I have to say that in a job that is as demanding as mine and many of the jobs of those around the table here tonight, the opportunity to completely lose yourself in a sport or in an environment where if you're hanging on the edge of a precarious exposed wall, the only thing that you are thinking about is whether that next handhold is going to be within your reach or not. And so I've learned so many lessons about risk management, about whether your reach should indeed exceed your grasp or not, whether you're expanding and building your mental capacity and your physical capacity sufficiently regularly. All of these things, trust in the rope, trust in the layer, trust in your ability to grasp that next handhold. And so I'm sure that many of the people around the table have interests that have repackaged knowledge and have been brought back into their personal life or their work life. And so I would say that that's probably true of my world in rock climbing. I'm not so good at speed and going down. Many people may be excellent skiers around the table, and I'm pretty hopeless at that. And so what appears to be difficult, challenging to one person is really easy to another. And I am humble and aware that there are much more difficult pursuits involving speed, which sometimes terrifies me.
Leila, thank you so much for sharing, first of all, your technical knowledge, your job, your future of South Africa, but most importantly, just a few words about yourself, which is always wonderful to hear that there's a human being behind that incredible brain and clever person who's doing what she's achieving. At this point, I'd like to thank you. Leila. Stay with us. We've got dinner in a moment. I know you might have to get takeaway from the restaurant or something. Could I hand over now to Palesa to take us to the next stage of this evening?
Thank you very much, Sharon. And thank you to Leila for a phenomenal talk on resilience, policy certainty, infrastructure development, digital expansion in South Africa. And something that you mentioned, which was quite important, that although COVID has sparked the biggest fall since 1946 in South Africa, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, as seen in our agriculture sector here in South Africa. And speaking of agriculture, we are going to welcome back Gus Dale, who is going to tell us about the Seven Springs Syrah and Rosé wines as we move into our main course of haunch of venison, as well as roasted wild mushrooms for the vegetarian option. This will be paired with the opulent berry spicy Syrah from Seven Springs, which is smooth and full-bodied. Gus, please take us through that pairing.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Well, unfortunately, being stuck in South Africa, I've had to cook for myself this evening. So I don't know if you can see that, but I'm having ostrich with some mushrooms with gorgonzola, cheese and walnut pecan sauce and beans. So we're not exactly on the same page as far as the menu is concerned, but
not a bad chef.
Well, excuse me for looking so hot and sweaty, but I've been dashing in and out to prepare my food at the same time. Anyway, enough about that. So let's have a quick taste of this divine Syrah. We call it Syrah. Its common New World name is Shiraz. The French name for it is Syrah. And this is one of the only 4 cultivars that we produce on the farm, the others being Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, and Pinot Noir. And as I mentioned earlier, because of our cooler climate, you may not expect actually something like Syrah to be grown in this valley. But in fact, what I would say is that the climate and the soil that we have up in the valley at Seven Springs is actually very, very similar to that of the Northern Rhone, just south of Lyon in France. So it's not a big, chunky, robust Syrah like you might expect from certain areas like the Swartland, much warmer climate in South Africa, or even some of those big Shirazes from Australia. This is really grown on northern slopes, northern facing slopes, again at around 280, 300 meters of altitude. Predominantly, compared to the Chardonnay that we spoke of earlier, these are much more clay soils. There's a little bit less loam, there's still a lot of shale, but the mother rock of this block is actually clay. And that's wonderful because clay not only helps with the depth of color as far as red varieties are concerned, not so much with Syrah, but especially with Pinot, which tends to give a lighter color. These clay soils are magnificent because yes, they maintain moisture, but the vine is not saturated by wet feed, and a vine doesn't like wet feed. It needs to struggle a little bit, and these clay soils, they enable during these periods that we have, not so much this year, but especially in the drought years. That clay really helps them maintain moisture so that the vines can struggle through and find their water through capillary action instead of irrigation.
Thank you so much, Gus, and thanks, Sharon, for that. I think we definitely need to let people go off and have their dinner now. Some of the rooms have been shuffled around, so don't be surprised. It's all part of tonight's networking, so please go ahead and enjoy your main course. I would love to talk a little bit more about wine and head over to Sharon to actually chat to the connoisseurs just a bit about the rosé tonight, as well as some of the other wines as we wrap up. I know everybody's probably quite exhausted already, but I think it would be such a wonderful way to sort of make our way to the end of our evening. So Sharon, over to you.
Thank you very much, Palesa, and thanks for all of you just still being around, persevering our fun evening on wine and food. We managed to solve the new world energy as well as the fantastic Seven Springs wines and everything in between. But I'd just like to have just a couple of moments conversation on the wine side before we do the formal close. And obviously we are continuing thereafter, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Mr. Bond, known sometime as Tim Pearson. Sorry, I caught you with a mouthful of water there. My sincere apologies. I'll keep talking so that you can swallow and look respectable. You have a number of other wines other than the two we've tasted. We're about to talk a little bit about the rosé. Just a little on that small acreage that you have. What are the wines that you focused on as you were recommended to do?
We weren't actually recommended to focus on wines. I think what Vaughan said was that Ken Forrester suggested we didn't plant a fruit salad, which meant don't plant too many varieties. We knew that the Hamlanada Valley, or that area, was synonymous with Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. Mm-hmm. So they were almost, if you like, a given. It was my opinion that we could, and I don't know where it came from, that I wanted to make a Syrah or a Shiraz. There was not much planted in the valley. Most of the Syrahs that came from South Africa were of the bolder style. They were made in places like Paarl, Stellenbosch, and the Swartland.
Swartland, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I felt that we could make a Syrah in a slightly different style, so that's why I said, look, let's go for a Syrah as well. And that was the rationale behind choosing. I guess we could have tossed a coin, Sharon, and come up with any variety of most grapes in the world. Albarino was one. One of your guests tonight was talking about Albarino, which
Andrew.
is Andrew, yeah, from northern Spain. That was a variety we thought about. But as a startup company, we didn't want to plant varieties that were sort of not, if you like, synonymous with the area we were in. So we had to be commercial as well as, if you like, adventurous. So that was why we chose the 4 varieties we did. And Gus said he joined us like 2 years ago. A winemaker prior to this was a young lady called Rihanna van der Merwe, and Rihanna is now in Australia. She met a guy, and he was Australian and had to move there because he couldn't go to South Africa. But that's the story behind Seven Springs.
I think when you look at the range, the thing about our Chardonnay was we actually couldn't agree whether we should do an unoaked Chardonnay or a Chardonnay with oak.
So simply you do both.
We did.
Well, we decided we would do both until our customer base told us they wanted one or the other. But it's never happened.
No, so you still got both.
Every time we do a tasting, it's a 50-50 split. So, you know, and what it's taught me is that the Chardonnay grape is incredibly elegant. Mm-hmm. And when it has the right climate and the right skill, and, you know, Gus coming from Burgundy has absolutely those skills to bring it to its very best. And then also the oaked version, which no one got to taste tonight, but you know what, go hunt it out.
I'm sure it's lovely.
Herard has a good supply. You know, again, that gentle oaking. Mm-hmm. The UK is against heavily oaked Chardonnays in the main, and I have to say I understand that. But you know, you can learn to love Chardonnay with a little bit of oak.
A little bit of oak is fantastic. You talked about Gerard a moment ago. Can I just switch to you, Gerard? And yes. You and I went to one of our webinars where the guy was talking about their pinotage that they had planted just out of Gatwick Airport. Mm-hmm. And there's a vineyard, and it's got 10 rows of pinotage. And we are not the only country outside of South Africa to take its native plant pinotage out of the country. And they've been planted there. And I actually spent a good few hours harvesting, and I mean harvesting, doing the real job, and getting myself covered in juice and lovely things. It was fantastic. And then we were honored with a lunch afterwards at Leonard's Lee farm. Yeah. But Gerard, what I want you to do is just 2 minutes. Can you just tell us your pinotage history of you and your family, just very quickly?
Yes, certainly, no problem at all. 2 minutes. I don't know if that's long enough, but I'll try to.
It's not, but you'll have to do your best.
Okay, no problem. Put the clock on. Well, basically, in early 1900s, 1906, roughly, the Cape government asked the most educated viniculturists in the UK and in South Africa at the time to go on a world trip or different trips around the world to do some research work on different grape varieties around the world. And basically, this guy, my great-grandfather, of course, took his COVID test, as you do, and got on a boat and took some journeys around and gathered loads and loads of different grape varieties. And the core group comes around the 177 different grape varieties. So stuff like Albarino or Sangiovese and Malbec and Carmenere. We've got such a lovely variety of grape varieties growing in South Africa. And all these grape varieties is something that my great-grandfather imported into South Africa to see what would work and what wines we can create in South Africa. Now, 2 grape varieties that he actually brought back was from sort of France, was the Pinot Noir and the Cinsault. And what he did was he took the 2 plants and he brushed them together to get a pollination. And from that pollination came 4 seedlings that he planted in his back garden. And they grew up, and actually my great-grandfather got a position in KWV, and he left his property. Over the 2 years, the sort of garden got overgrown, and a young lecturer actually cycled past one day on his bike, and he saw what was going on. They were busy renovating the property and ripping up the garden. And he said, whoa, stop. That's Perrault's experimental vines. And it's those vines, those 4 vines, that is the pinotage. And it's that time that my great-grandfather revisited the plants in 1924, 1925, basically. And he revisited the plants, and that's when the name pinotage came about. So basically, from those 4 plantings in my back garden comes all the pinotage around the world. So pinotage being planted over 45 countries in the world, and the UK being the latest country. And as Sharon said, last year we had the first UK pinotage, and maybe there's something in there. Well, yeah.
Gus, the most important part, I want you just to give us very quickly, 2 minutes, some insight into your rosé and why it is so special. You shared it a little bit with our group, but the rest of us have not heard of it.
The Syrah grape, like many other red grapes in South Africa, has clear juice. The only way you can get color into those wines is by skin contact. So we decided to make our rosé from Syrah, and we do this by loading all the Syrah into a press so that it has minimum skin contact. That means we get the benefit of the clear juice from the center of the berry, but because of time and contact, we also get a tiny bit of color extraction at the same time as well. So the amount of time that your berries spend in the press is vital in order to get the color for your rosé. This technique is called a saigner method in France. It means to bleed color from the grapes. Saigner, Sang, blood. So we're bleeding the color from the grapes through the press, and we make it more like a white wine than we do a red wine. Once the skins are removed from the juice and we've got the color we want, we ferment it in the style of a white wine. That means we have the freshness, the lightness, and the elegance of a white wine, whilst enjoying some of the color and the structure and the fruit from the red. And basically, that's all I've done with this Syrah Rosé, is to try and capture the elegance of white wine along with some of the complexities that we would get from the Syrah grape, from the body of the fruit, the structure, and the tannins. Now, we don't want a white wine with lots of tannins, but we do want structure. So when you drink this wine, hopefully, what you're going to experience is a really fresh, full-bodied wine that is bone dry. There's no residual sugar left in this wine. Every sugar that was in this must has been fermented dry. There's not a hint of sweetness from sugar.
You've just
The
explained
sweetness and
why
the
I
fruit,
like it.
the sweetness and thank you. The sweetness and the fruit that you're experiencing on this wine comes from the body of the fruit of the Shiraz. It has nothing to do with residual sugar. This wine is bone dry. That's why it appeals to so many people, because it has the beauty of white wine. It has the body and fruit of something you would expect from a red wine without the aggressive tannins, and a finish that is equal to what you're pairing it with. In this case, something sweetened for dessert. But actually, this rosé for me goes best of all with scrambled eggs at about 10:30 on a Sunday morning. Cheers to you all.
Fantastic combination. I haven't got to the rosé. I'm going to in a moment. I'm still with my red of my main course. I can't eat as fast as you go. All my timetable has set me to eat. I would like to just hand over to Palesa to please give us the beginning of the formal close.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Gus, I feel like we could have you talking about wine all night. It's fascinating and just interesting to listen to you speaking. And thank you very much to Gerard as well. I think we can wrap up with a quote that I recently came across. This is Barack Obama and what he had to say about Ubuntu at Nelson Mandela's 100th birthday celebration. He said there's a word in South Africa, Ubuntu, that describes his greatest gift, referring to Nelson Mandela. His recognition that we are all bound together in ways that can be invisible to the eye, that there is a oneness to humanity, that we achieve ourselves by sharing ourselves with others and caring for those around us. And I think that is just so encapsulating of South Africans, no matter where we are in the world. We love to connect, we love our country, and nothing can prevent us from doing that. I think tonight was such a beautiful evening. Just to be able to do that, I think, is such a privilege. And thank you very much to Sharon and her team for making this possible for all of us. It was such a pleasure emceeing tonight's event for everybody and to meet those people who I have not met before. So I'd like to hand over to Sharon to do the formal closing this evening.
Thank you very much, Palesa. Where do I start saying thank you? First of all, to all of you for actually having the mojo to come and join us and do something so completely different. I know I am going to have a smile on my face for weeks. You can't wipe it off my face. It's just such a lovely feeling to have dressed up, but done something different, and just see all of you enjoying yourselves, which for me is just absolutely amazing. Palesa, for that quote, a very meaningful one, something that brings back the spirit of Mandela for us, which I think is something that's sort of almost part of the DNA of all South Africans, is Mandela. I'd also like to thank our speakers, people who were involved today. So I start with Jacka Marie, with Dr. Leila Fourie, and then to Tim Pearson and to Gus from the winemaking side. We couldn't have put it all together in this way. And just the biggest thank you to Palesa, who kept us all on time, kept us moving along, and just enjoyed us keeping us in a very organized fashion. It's something that our awards dinners have always been challenged by, not so much the gala dinners. But thank you very, very much. And to my team, I want to start with June. Thank you very much. If it weren't for June in the Isle of Man, I think we would have sunk under the load of what had to be achieved by tonight. So thank you, June, and to Stuart, who's picked up the technology aspect and the invitations and just making the wheels turn to make sure that this thing all technically came together. And there's a lot behind it, not just what you're seeing here at the moment. Huge amount of effort that went into that. And to the executive team that worked with me over the past months in brainstorming ideas, putting things together, and to the guys from all the islands, Isle of Man, Jersey, Guernsey, for joining in the spirit of what we've been doing here tonight. Thank you very much. To our platinum members, what would we do without you? We wouldn't be a chamber. So I have to probably say the biggest thanks to the platinum members for just being there to support us and help us to move to the next level of growth as a chamber, which is where we're going to next. So thank you very much. If I carry on, you'll all need a thank you, and I will stop at this point. What I would like to just say is that this is not the end of the evening. This is the end of the formal part of the evening. This room is going to stay open for as long as we want to. If people wish to, you can break out into rooms if you would like to go there and chat with other people in smaller groups, or we just all wind down having a lovely conversation together. So thank you to all of you for attending. Please stay on with us. I haven't even got to the rosé, least of all the sweet wine, and I'm still on my main course. So please don't leave me because I'm still eating dinner. Thanks very much. I hope I've remembered everybody.
Cheers.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Valerie.
Well done. Thank you.